By the third day, Victor Hale had stopped sleeping in his bedroom. He lay instead on a leather couch outside the nursery, fully dressed, shoes still on, as if rest were something that might ambush him if he let his guard down. The house, once a symbol of his success, had become an echo chamber of fear. Every hallway carried the scent of food meant for a child who would not eat. Warm milk, mashed fruit, carefully pureed meals prepared by chefs who normally cooked for presidents and royalty, all of it cooled and congealed, untouched, before being quietly removed so no one would have to say the truth out loud. Lily had always been a good eater. Victor clung to that memory as if it were a life raft. She used to clap her hands when she saw her spoon, used to smear more food on her cheeks than in her mouth, laughing at the mess. Now she sat curled into herself, her small body rigid with a resolve that made no sense for someone so young. When a spoon approached, she turned her head sharply away. When coaxed, she closed her lips tight, jaw set in a way that frightened Victor more than any tantrum could have. There were no screams, no tears, just refusal. Quiet, unwavering refusal. Doctors came and went, their voices low and cautious, like men walking through a minefield. They checked her throat, her stomach, her blood. They spoke of stress responses, of toddlers reacting to loss in ways adults could not predict. Victor nodded, signed papers, approved tests without reading them. He would have bought the entire hospital if it meant Lily would take a single bite. He stood beside her crib for hours, counting the slow rise and fall of her chest, bargaining with a universe that had already taken his wife and now seemed intent on taking his daughter piece by piece. The staff moved through the mansion with careful precision. Every door closed softly, every footstep was measured. No one laughed anymore. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer, as if the house itself were holding its breath. In the kitchen, plates were prepared with reverence, garnished and adjusted again and again, as if perfection might persuade the child where love could not. By the fifth day, some of the chefs avoided eye contact with Victor altogether. Failure hung in the air like smoke. And always, quietly, there was Esther. She arrived before dawn and left long after dark, her routine unchanged even as the house unraveled. She dusted shelves no one looked at, folded tiny clothes that no longer smelled like baby powder but like antiseptic wipes. She paused outside the nursery more often than necessary, pretending to straighten a picture frame or smooth a curtain, her eyes always drifting back to Lily. Esther had raised children of her own, buried one, and she recognized the stillness in Lily not as stubbornness but as something deeper. The child was not refusing food. She was protecting herself. Victor noticed Esther only in fragments at first, an arm reaching for a cloth, a soft hum drifting down the hallway, a presence that felt steady in a place that had lost its balance. He did not know her story. He barely knew her name. In his world, people like Esther blended into the background, necessary but invisible, their labor absorbed into the shine of polished floors and clean glass. But grief has a way of sharpening the edges of perception. On the seventh day, Victor watched from the nursery doorway as Esther adjusted Lily's blanket. Lily did not pull away. That alone was enough to catch his attention. The nurses had tried everything. They made feeding into a game, airplane spoons swooping through the air. They sang songs from television shows, clapped, exaggerated smiles until their faces ached. Lily's eyes followed them with mild interest, but when the moment came, she shut down. Completely, gaze sliding past them as if they were furniture. One nurse wiped her eyes after leaving the room, whispering that she had never seen anything like it. Victor sank into a chair and pressed his palms into his face, feeling the weight of his own helplessness crush down on him. By the eighth day, the word, too, was spoken aloud. Not shouted, not argued, just stated, clinically, as a possibility. Victor nodded again, but something inside him rebelled. He had built companies from nothing, bent markets to his will, forced outcomes through sheer determination. Yet here he was, unable to convince a 2-year-old to eat. Money meant nothing in the face of a child's silent grief. That truth hollowed him out. Late that night, Victor stood alone in the nursery, the room washed in the soft blue glow of a nightlight shaped like a moon. Lily lay awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He whispered her name, voice cracking, and reached out to touch her hand. She did not pull away, but she did not squeeze his finger either. It was as if she were somewhere far away, a place he could not reach. Victor rested his forehead against the crib rail and let a single tear fall, the kind he would never allow himself in boardrooms or interviews. From the hallway came a faint sound, a hum, low and rhythmic. Esther stood there, holding a folded blanket, unsure whether to interrupt. When Victor looked up, she froze, apology already forming on her lips. Instead of dismissing her, Victor surprised himself by asking how long she had worked here. Esther answered softly. Then, after a pause, she said something that no doctor had said yet. She's listening. She's just not ready. The words struck him harder than any diagnosis. Listening. Victor had been trying to make Lily eat, to make her respond, to make her return to the child she had been. He had not considered that she might need something else entirely. Something slower, something quieter. The 9th day dawned heavy and gray. Another tray sat cooling on the bedside table, steam fading into nothing. Victor felt the edges of panic clawing at his chest. He turned to Esther, who stood near the door, hands folded, eyes gentle but steady. She looked at Lily, then back at Victor, and in that moment, he saw not a maid, but a woman who understood pain in a way money never could. "May I try something?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor hesitated only a second before nodding. Desperation had stripped him of pride. At that point, he would have listened to anyone who spoke with certainty. Esther stepped forward, not with urgency, but with calm, and the room seemed to shift around her, as if even the air was willing to wait. Esther did not ask for permission again. She simply moved, slow and deliberate, as if sudden motion might shatter something fragile in the room. Victor stepped back instinctively, giving her space, though he did not fully understand why. Perhaps it was the way Esther carried herself, not with confidence exactly, but with certainty, the kind born of long years spent listening instead of commanding. The nurses hovered near the wall, uncertain, their training offering no guidance for this moment. Esther lowered herself to the floor beside the crib, her joints creaking softly. She did not look at Victor or the doctors. Her attention belonged entirely to Lily. The child's eyes flicked toward her, cautious, observant. Esther smiled, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to soften her face. Then she began to hum. It was not a song Victor recognized. There were no words, no clear melody he could follow. It rose and fell gently, like breathing, like waves meeting a shore and retreating again. The sound filled the room without demanding anything from it. The monitors continued their quiet beeping, but even they seemed to fade into the background. Lily's gaze fixed on Esther, her small body still, as if she were listening with more than her ears. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Victor realized his fists were clenched and forced himself to relax them, afraid that even the tension in his body might somehow disturb what was happening. Esther kept humming, her eyes half-lidded, rocking slightly back and forth. It was not a performance. It was a memory, shared aloud. Lily shifted. It was the smallest movement, a flex of fingers, a slight tilt of the head, but in that room, it felt monumental. Esther did not react. She did not rush to capitalize on it, did not reach out or speak Lily's name. She allowed the moment to exist on its own terms. Slowly, she reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out a small cloth doll. Its fabric was faded, its stitches uneven, one button eye slightly looser than the other. It was clearly not new. It had been loved. Esther placed the doll on the floor, just within Lily's reach, and withdrew her hand. The humming continued, steady and patient. Lily leaned forward, curiosity overcoming caution. She touched the doll's arm, then pulled her hand back as if testing whether the world would punish her for it. Nothing happened. The room remained quiet, safe. She touched it again, this time holding on. Victor felt his throat tighten. He had bought Lily rooms full of toys, shelves stacked with pristine, expensive things designed to stimulate and entertain. None of them had mattered. This simple, worn doll held her attention in a way nothing else had for days. Esther watched, her eyes warm but alert, as if she were witnessing something sacred. After a while, Esther reached for the bowl of porridge she had prepared earlier, ignored until now. It was plain, lightly warm, smelling faintly of milk and grain. She dipped her finger into it and lifted it slowly. Lily watched the movement, unafraid but cautious. Esther tapped the doll's mouth with her finger, then her own, smiling gently. The gesture was simple, almost playful, but free of expectation. Lily hesitated. The room seemed to hold its breath again. Then, tentatively, she opened her mouth. It was not a full bite. It barely counted as a taste. But it was enough. Esther did not cheer or speak. She did not praise or clap. She simply smiled and hummed, as if this was exactly what she had expected all along. Lily swallowed, frowned at the unfamiliar sensation, then reached out again, touching the doll with one hand and Esther's sleeve with the other. Victor covered his mouth, tears spilling freely now. He did not bother to hide them. The nurses exchanged stunned looks, one of them pressing a hand to her chest. Another quietly stepped out of the room, already reaching for her phone to call the doctor. No one interfered. No one dared. Esther waited a long moment before offering another taste. Lily accepted it more easily this time. Then another. Each bite was separated by patience, by humming, by stillness. There was no rush to make up for lost days. Esther understood something Victor was only beginning to grasp. Healing did not happen by force. It happened by trust. As the bowl slowly emptied, Lily's shoulders relaxed. Some of the tension drained from her small body, replaced by something like relief. When she finished, she leaned back against her pillow, eyelids heavy, fingers still curled around the doll. Esther gently wiped her mouth, her touch light, respectful. Lily did not pull away. Instead, she yawned, a deep, bone-tired sound that felt like a blessing. Victor sank into a chair, his legs suddenly weak. The weight he had been carrying for 9 days did not vanish all at once, but it shifted, became bearable. He watched Esther settle Lily back into her crib, still humming, still unhurried. When Lily finally drifted off to sleep, her breathing even and calm, the room exhaled with her. The doctors arrived soon after, voices hushed, eyes wide as they took in the scene. They asked questions, took notes, murmured explanations that involved psychology and attachment and stress responses. Victor barely heard them. His gaze stayed on Esther, who stood quietly to one side now, hands folded, as if what she had done required no acknowledgement. Later, when the room had emptied and only the soft hum of machines remained, Victor approached her. He searched for words grand enough to match his gratitude and found none. All he could manage was a simple, "Thank you," his voice thick with emotion. Esther nodded. She just needed to feel safe, she said. Sometimes children stop eating when they don't know where their comfort went. Victor thought of his wife, of the emptiness her absence had carved into the house. He thought of how he had filled that emptiness with noise and people and effort, never once considering that Lily might need quiet instead. He looked at Esther differently then, not as staff, not as help, but as someone who had seen him at his most helpless and offered compassion instead of judgment. From that day on, Esther was no longer invisible. Lily asked for her by name, reaching out when she heard Esther's footsteps in the hallway. Meals became moments of connection instead of battle. And Victor learned a lesson that no amount of wealth had taught him before, that sometimes the impossible is not conquered but gently invited to pass.